This is the internet's worst gaming podcast coming to you from a frigid South Texas. It might be warmer where you're listening to it, but it's in the 40s here. And again, we live in Texas, so I'm not used to it, so I'm freezing my ass off. That noise you hear in the background is in fact my heater. You're going to hear it throughout this recording. I'm not turning it off. Joining me today is my IRL brother, Lord Masta, aka Thomas. Hello.
Hello, Loki Jarson. It's been a long time, like months or something.
Yeah, we've been meaning to do this since like mid-December, and it just keeps getting delayed due to weather and appliances and 2 water heaters dying. Yeah, it's long delayed, but we're here today.
And also burnt my little ring finger, not the whole finger, but a part of it because I, took the, what happened with the square pan that was heated while I was trying to cook something, and then used that.
I don't think that would be a contributing factor to the delay, but okay.
Yeah, had a little burnt, but since it's been 3 weeks prior to this recording, it's all healed up now. It's nothing, just but a tiny little scar.
And considering you usually play on PC, you never use that finger anyway, so it's fine.
And for a controller on console, you just hold it. It's just one of the fingers that you just hold the controller at the bottom.
What have you been playing these last few months since we last recorded?
Oh Lord, a lot of things, but most of them are just old stuff that we've talked about in the past, or that's what I do for a living, such as those strategy games and a few other old Rockstar game stuff whenever I play with friends or make new friends on there, which is a rarity. But lately I've been playing some game that I've heard about years ago. In fact, I first heard of it even before it was made, back when it was just a rumor, but due to my, this was concurrent when I first got into Crusader Kings 2 in 2017, when I was, playing this one area in Bohemia, modern-day Czech Republic, or Czechia, which depends on who you ask.
No one in the modern day says that, so it doesn't matter.
What, Czechia? Google does. If you were to look up on the map on Google Maps, it says Czechia officially. But to every single...
I'm going to tell you right now, nobody's listening to this in Czechoslovakia.
Well, anyways, and that game is called Kingdom Come Deliverance. You ever heard of that?
Now, I swear we've talked about this before on show.
We never did.
And if in my research I find out that I did, I'm leaving this part in. If in the research I find out we didn't, I'll cut this bit, okay? Anyways, yes, I did unfortunately play this on Game Pass a while back. I only played a couple hours for some Game Pass quests. I fucking hated it. It's every bad thing about ultra-realistic games I've ever hated.
And me being such a, for lack of a better term, realist aficionado for games.
Especially when it comes to historical things. You're an appreciator of antiquities.
Late antiquity, early Middle Ages, around there.
I don't mean antiquity the era. I mean antiquities as being old.
Okay. So, yeah, Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's an action role-playing video game, which, would that count as a Western RPG? Made in Europe and everything?
I wouldn't even count it as an action game. But yes, it is an RPG. Made by, Middle Europeans.
Yes, Czech video game developer that's based in Prague. It's called Warhorse Studios. I mean, then again, I think it was back in 2020, around March of 2020 is when we first brought up about, European game developers. In fact, I think we first brought that up way back when we talked about My Summer Car of Finland.
Yeah, the CD Projekt Red got big, and every single person in that region said, "Oh yeah, we can make games too."
It's like North America and Japan for a few decades, up until this point, has just been the mainstay, and now Europeans are kind of catching up.
Yeah, in all seriousness, the European market from, east of Spain and west of Russia, basically, has been huge the last decade, just churning out games of varying quality. What did you think of Kingdom Come?
Yeah, when I played it, it was on Game Pass, which I can't remember I actually spent money on it, or is it just free because of how Game Pass works these days? But nevertheless, And when I mentioned Bohemia Republic, that's where the game is set in, which to be exact, and by the way, each time you start that game, you almost never skip the intro because the loading takes too damn long. You just hear that whole, you know, it's the whole background of the setting back in 1403 at the times of King Wenceslas IV, and yeah, that whole scenario of like the old emperor's done and then this new king, and then there's this other person from Hungary along with a horde of Kuman mercenaries that raid the village and such. And you play as this protagonist of a man named Henry, son of a blacksmith, in which he later joins the service of Radzig Kobyla. Which, mind you, most of the characters are actual historical figures. You, however, the protagonist is the only fictional one, I believe. There are probably a couple of fictional ones.
It, yeah, I imagine there are several. That also seems impossible.
What, a
because
peasant?
well, I know I've seen things from the game. Like years ago, I used to watch YouTubers I will not name here, and they did a section of the game, and I was like, okay, so if you did this in the setting it's actually take place, you would be killed. So I don't believe any actual historical things actually could happen in the game. The realism comes from the way the game is played.
Mm-hmm.
Terribly.
Yeah, it's like survival mode in some of the Bethesda games. When I say survival mode, I mean you gotta, dress warmly, eat when your energy gets low, reminds a little bit of the cores from Red Dead 2. Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
and oh boy, the combat. Do you ever got involved in any combat from that game? With the techniques and everything?
Yes, it sucks.
Yeah, that would take some getting used to. But there is one thing that I will never get used to, and I will never forgive the game for that. That's going to be probably my only time I actually say something negative due to the mechanic of a game like that, despite the fact that I would highly praise the story and the attention to detail and realism. But there is one that really, oh, I got to find a word for it. There's thousands of them.
Fucking stupid.
That's polite. I would say something more. Damn it! What's the word for it? Again, I'm gonna have trouble with this, but let's just say it involves lock picking. You ever seen a lock pick mechanic of that game compared to the mini games in the
No, I
past?
never bought. I only played maybe 2 hours max, and I think I died in the barn, and then I got the achievement I needed, so I stopped playing.
Okay, so we've played many games that has the lock picking feature as far back as we can remember is Splinter Cell, and then we played Elder Scrolls, which with Oblivion, and then they changed that over in Fallout with how lock picking works, in which they take that and into Skyrim. That whole turning thing, right? And
Yeah.
here in Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's a you have to use two sticks where you got to rotate the knob, and at the same time you got to use that little pick to follow it. I mean, it's a struggle to do both of your thumbs. I mean, there is a setting that could make it easier, but it's still very, very challenging. And the only time that it won't be such a hard time for you to lockpicking is that you got to level up that lockpicking skill, which would take quite a while. Which the only way to do that is pick more locks, and that would make the whole process even more difficult for you until you level up more and more. Then you get the perks, which lessens the chance of it breaking.
So what do you pick exactly? Because the historical realism, it's like, well, there weren't doorknobs back then, so what the fuck are you picking? Locked chests?
Keyholes on doors, chests.
I know, but there are no doorknobs.
In the like doorknobs in the sense that there is no keyhole in the knob itself.
I mean, doorknobs literally did not exist.
Yeah, they just have that little thing at the but just below the knob. They would have that where you insert the key in. Like, what do you call those?
Okay.
That's probably what they
I
had.
have no idea. The fucking lock, sure.
Yeah.
But that's my question of like, so you're just playing like a medieval thief simulator? Are you supposed to be like delivering the king's boots to some other land or some stupid shit?
Well, at the moment, based on the last time I remembered playing, it's just like we got through the whole prologue, and then here we are in chapter 1. It's like, yes, your whole home village got burned down by the commands and this guy who's has a claim to the throne or whatever, the whole thing of that you're just one of the survivors of that massacre.
Mm-hmm.
Although the only weapons I use is just the sword they kind of gave me at the beginning, and as well as the bow that I found off of some dead guy. And even that one takes some learning curve because, different weapon types, different actions, and especially the way you have to swing. And you try to swing one way, so you make sure that your opponent doesn't swing on the other, and how they block and such.
Yeah, it seems needlessly difficult, like everything else in the game. Yes.
And of course, depending on the armor that you are wearing, which is basically how many hits can you take, which isn't very much. It's not necessarily one stab and you die. It's just a few and you go down. Same for the other, but for me, it took a while when I was just dealing with lowly bandits. Like what I would do first is just use a bow and just hope that you aim precisely because they're not always dead on accurate. It's just you hope you hit first, strike first, and then you go into melee, and even then it takes a while.
Mm.
Even though it should be noted that I was playing on the Xbox version of the game, which, when it first came out, it had a lot more glitches and software bugs, which I'm sure they have fixed it since then, and as well as subsequently all the little DLCs that they released as the months went on after the game's release. Which I wasn't around that time because I'm such a late comer when I got it last year.
Yeah, that's the other thing. They've had like 15 things of DLC for them, at least five. At least five things
Yeah,
of DLC.
it was about 5. It wasn't much. But it's just enough to keep it a little interesting, especially for the uninitiated like me.
Well, yeah, because like in the main quest, shall we say, you play as this Henry fella, and you swear an allegiance to the king, I guess. And you swear an oath of vengeance on that guy who killed your village, and you go kill him? Or it's something even lamer?
You actually join the service of a local lord, basically a nobleman, who owns a small part of land there.
Yes, that's how it worked back then.
Yeah. In which you work with that guy who's going to lead a resistance movement against Sigmund's invasion. Sigmund of Luxembourg, who was the King of Hungary and Croatia at that time. And as well as King of Germany and Bohemia and Holy Roman Empire. Yeah. He had a lot of titles over the years. Because that's how the HRE worked at that time. Because, the Emperor had no real power. He was just basically, kind of like a figurehead. And you got a bunch of little prince electorates, which are the ones that can choose who can be Emperor next once the old guy either dies or abdicates.
So why isn't the king involved in this campaign then?
So, yeah, the King of Bohemia, and by the way, the King of Hungary, as they were mentioned, Hungary's not part of the Holy Roman Empire, which at that time, in 1403 AD, as that game takes place, Hungary and Croatia was one kingdom. It was a united kingdom. It's basically 2 titles, but 1 monarch, and is an independent entity outside of the HRE. So basically, you're invading somebody's turf. And also have a claim to it.
So how is your little loser blacksmith's son going to make any change in this world if he's not a nobleman?
It's basically a quest of vengeance and justice.
Is that even allowed? Is my point. For all the realism, like I'll just spoil ahead. What I saw years ago, right? I saw a quest that's probably many hours away from what you played. It's YouTube stuff. Of someone helped some lady get her sister married, right? He went to town, won some stupid archery contest to get some wine for the wedding, brought a horseback for a wedding. Not a horseback, he brought a horseback to the place. And some other goddamn thing. Made like a shitty crown or something to give to the bride. And that was all to help the queen or princess or somebody. She was married, right? And your quest reward is you get to fuck her. And it's like, y'all keep, in this game, they keep, because it's part of HRE, whatever. They believe the same sort of stuff. They keep invoking God and all this stuff, but it's like, yeah, you can go ahead and commit adultery, no one gives a shit. That doesn't seem realistic.
Well, if I'm just going to use, Crusader King street terms, and Catholicism and most of the other Christian faiths at that time, adultery is criminal for females, but for males it's shunned. So it's not criminal when a man does it.
Sexism. Ancient sexism. So now we come to I'm sure you have more to say, but I want to ask the most important question I always ask about every video game you've ever told me about ever. Is this fun? Because the very little I played is such a pain in the ass. It took me so long to get to the point where I needed that achievement to die in jail of a fire.
What the
It took
hell?
hours. It was like one of the first. It was the only achievement I got in that game because I needed to get one, right? So I was like, "What's the fastest thing to do?" And it was 2 hours. I had to go through all the sword stuff. I had to muck shit. I had to walk around town. I had to eat food or I would die. I had to haggle for prices, and I went broke. And then I finally went to jail and burned to death, and I got my achievement uninstalled and never played it again.
Now, haggling, that's a separate issue in itself.
Ugh, that's a fucking horrible system.
Yeah, there was no price fixing back then. Because nobody in the right mind has ever thought of the idea of fixed prices.
There's no regulation. So if, like, some dude, a blacksmith, let's say, you're like, hey, I need you to fix my sword. I'm like, okay, that'll be, I don't know, 100 kroner, whatever the fucking currency they use. What was the currency?
I would think it is Kron roughly because, again, HRE is based mostly in Germany and the currency coins, they just go along with it.
So the blacksmith says 100 kroner, and you're like, what about 50 kroner? And instead of the blacksmith saying, nah, you need more, they say, nah, fuck you, we're done negotiating. It's a terrible system.
And it's also, I'm sure it'll improve upon when you level up whatever haggling skill, speechcraft or whatever they had. Persuasion, there you go.
They just took Oblivion, took out all the magic and all the elves, and made a worse version of it.
But when you asked me the question of is it fun, I think just going to go with your sentiment. It is a pain in the ass, I will admit. But I'm sure it'll take days, game days, for it to no longer be a pain in the ass when you realize.
You're still gonna play it?
Whenever I devote more time to it, yes, even though I would never record videos of it, because I would just be such a novice if anybody were to look at me like that. But still, I was interested because me being such a not only a huge history buff and also like to play games that are quite realistic, and I mean it's still impressive. It's just there's some mechanics that's just it'll take some time getting used to it. But sometimes I'm the person that wants the game to kick my ass a little so I can learn from it.
I would describe your taste in video games as eclectic, unusual, off the beaten path, different than what would normally be featured on this here podcast. It's very basic stuff that Stizzy and I mostly talk about. The occasional, off indie game you never heard of from me or JRPG or whatever. But when you're like, oh, I played this weird ass game you've never heard of, it's like, huh? That's what you do.
Yeah, I guess that's the best word I've ever heard. Eclectic.
Eclectic, yes. I know we've never heard that's in one of the Turtles movies. A game I have heard of, and again, this is another one. I swear we've talked about this before. And if we have, I'm leaving this in. And if we haven't, I'll cut this out. You had another Oregon Trail variant version? How many versions have there been?
Oh, well, the very first Oregon Trail was way back in the 1970s, right?
79, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and this most recent version of the Oregon Trail, which came out on Steam back in November of 2022.
Oh, that recent, wow.
So yeah, it's fairly recent. But when you look at pictures of it, it kind of reminds you of the original Oregon Trail. The whole side scroll thing. Instead of some other versions, like most notably Oregon Trail 2 and 3, and as well as 5, which is basically a remake of 2, where it's just a map with a little line on the map. If you recall.
No, not vague. Yeah. Okay, now I know what you're really.
Same thing for the other, trail derivative games like Yukon and Africa and Amazon, which is a bit different in its way. But there's a lot of trail games out there, especially Oregon, which it's like, sure, there have been spin-offs of the trail games, but nothing ever comes close to the one in Oregon, which they keep making different versions or variants of it. And sometimes mods or parodies of it, like the Oregon Trail, the Zombie Apocalypse version of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, which we have talked about on here.
Yeah, and as well as mentioned every once in a while, every time when it's April or October. which is when I do videos at. And of course, still do Organ Trail videos to this day, but until this found out of this new version, well, keyword new, of what is considered new to us. So compared to, the old Oregon Trail versions, I guess it's a side scroll, but there's a lot of differences, such as it's like, yes, you still do the whole build and name your party, but it's like party members like what you do, but however, it's different where everybody's got their own unique classes. Like every single party member matters rather than just nameless people. By nameless, I mean faceless.
So, as opposed to like older games where you're a doctor and it's whatever, or you're a carpenter, it's whatever. Yeah. Other people in your party, shall we say, are that profession.
Yeah. In the old versions, there were just other names in a party. Hanger-ons. Just trying to find the right word for it. But anyway, so now everybody has a class of its own. But it's always randomized each time you start one. So, there is no you, the character, anymore. It's just these are 4 characters that you start off with. And each one of them has their own starting items, skills, and personalities. So that way it makes every gameplay rather unique in itself. Like I had a doctor sort of individual who was a tidy person, as he likes to keep himself clean. And if there was a little thing on a trail that causes the hygiene meter to go down, it kind of goes down a little faster. And being tidy, which makes him a little, makes his morale go down a little, because that's just part of his personality. I'm just only saying as an example.
And then you remind him, hey, this is the 1860s. How about you just get used to being dirty? Not 1860s. I'm sorry, I'm way off.
It actually varies on each of the playable journeys. The earliest one as far back as the 1820s, which is before Oregon Trail, which is a thing. I'll get into that in a bit. And of course, there's like hundreds of random events for your choices, and as well as influenced by, each of the characters, like which one you choose want to interact with, which depends on the set skills and their personality traits. And, well, basically, it's more. Again, me with struggling with words, because there's just so many things where you got to do where you got to, such as you have to monitor your party members' health, morale, stamina, hygiene. Those are the 4 meters that are visible on screen. The health, morale, stamina, hygiene, and you have to manage that inventory that you could store in a wagon. And by the way, in the older trail games, you just stuff whatever thing you've bought from the store as much as you can, and there's no weight limit to the wagon, but it does have a limit of, that's like this amount of animals you buy. Is it going to pull a 7,000-pound wagon because you overloaded with the amount of crap you bought? Yeah. Now here, I think this is the best way to compare it, and because we played it together in the past. You remember in the Resident Evil games, again, the only one I ever played was Resident Evil 4, where they have this squarish grid of the amount of inventory you could store in a thing?
Sure, they put that in Oregon
Yes.
Trail. Okay.
So yeah, like whatever you bought, it adds space. It's like say a box of bullets, it takes 4 squares, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah. And a bag of meat that you got from a hunt, 4 squares. I'm just.
So this only makes sense if only one wagon can carry shit.
Yes.
Multiple wagons can't carry stuff. Shouldn't you have multiple suitcases?
If you bought a bigger wagon, yes.
No, but it's still one grid. It should be multiple grids. If it's multiple wagons, how are you going to fucking carry every single thing for every single wagon and every person in your trail in one box?
And you know what happens if you go over that limit?
You die.
Then the game won't continue. It says, hey, you're over encumbered. Drop which one of these items you want to dump out. Then you can continue.
You just throw it out there in the wilderness and say, fuck it, it's gone forever?
Yes. Gone forever.
How do they make an educational game even more dull?
I don't even know if it's educational compared
Well, it
to
used to be the original. Yeah. Now it just seems like it's management again. More shit you love.
Yes.
And you gotta. Do you have to feed and water your people too?
Not the water parts, but the feed. Yes, buy food and you got to hunt, which I mentioned a bit of that. Which is still the same old hunt as the original, if you remember back then. Rather than the point and shoot like in Oregon Trail 2 and 5 or 3. There was one.
Yeah, the ones where they tried to make it a game.
Yeah. But instead, they went back to the original of here's you, the person on the middle of the little hunting screen where you walk around slowly. You just shoot where you look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they went back to that sort of basics. And also sometimes you have to take multiple shots. Like it's not one and done like in the old games, but for bigger animals like bear and bison, they take 2 or 3 shots, and it doesn't matter where you hit it; it'll still take that many shots. There's no weak spot.
They still have like the random events of snake bite and fall down a hole, and strangers ahead.
Yes, there's random events like that throughout the trail, and as well as quests. Like
get to Oregon.
Not just get it to Oregon, but there's little quests on the trail. Like sometimes it's not just one event, but it's a chain event where it's like, okay, you encounter this person. It's like, okay, can you help out with this? And he said, yes. It's like, okay, good. It's like, we'll meet again at some other place further down the trail. Then eventually you meet this person again. It's like, oh, hello, and do this thing. Yeah, it can be a chain of events.
Okay.
Not to mention the rewards it'll give you, which could be any other item. And especially this one quest that involves a group of dragoons, which is army folks, where they all got separated. It's a Peoria party thing, where you have to go collect them all. By collect, I mean do this thing for them, and then the reward is a medallion, which is useless but useful for trading. Trade off for an item that you probably want when you get to the.
Why is it your responsibility, Mr. Random Wagon Trail Leader?
I don't know. That's just people just ask help, and yet, and of course, you could still pick your party members of depending on skills and traits to do them. And now here's another thing. I'll give you an example of what makes their skills useful. Like say, if your party member, if their profession was not a carpenter, then for example, their carpentry skill may tend to get low. And if you happen to have a wagon part break event, and if you say it's like, okay, which one of you has the best carpentry skill? Which again, it's a scale from 0 to 5. So if you pick the one that is low skilled, that means low chance of success and higher chance of failure, and so on and so forth. When you get higher, the less.
Makes sense. Sure. Would you say it decreases?
If you keep picking the same character of any of those party members, depending on their skill, if you keep doing the tasks over and over again, as long as they have the stamina to keep up, if you're being careful by it, then their skills could increase over time because they learn how to get used to it.
How the fuck? So they added an RPG mechanic, just like Kingdom Come, of like, oh yeah, the more you do it, the better you are.
So theoretically, your doctor character. He may be a shitty carpenter at the beginning of the trail, but over time, if you keep working on it, he might be a very good carpenter in addition of being a good medic.
Or you could fucking bring a carpenter.
Which you gotta unlock it.
What?
The occupations are random choices, but the ones that you start off when you first play the game is very limited. You can unlock more of these occupations when you do these other little playable journeys. Not just the main Oregon Trail, but there's other trails, so to speak, of the little journeys, which are shorter than the average Oregon Trail, and only about 2 of them that are about as long, but set in different settings and time.
Does this still have like those rotoscoped NPCs you talk to, or is it cartoon people?
Oh, they're all cartoon people. It's very cartoony. No, retroscope, FMV types. They don't have that here.
Yeah, the FMV people. Yeah, because when you say Oregon Trail, that's when my mind goes back to whatever version that was.
Yeah, that
right?
was Oregon Trail 2.
Yeah, the one with the da-da, and then...
Yeah, the infamous da-da.
Piece of wood. Yeah.
Yeah, that was from 1994.
That's, the iconic Oregon Trail, man. And To my knowledge, they've never changed it, but apparently they have. They just added even more bullshit.
And just
So,
what's that?
go ahead. Finish your thing.
And so far, and I've done many videos of it, of not just the main Oregon Trail, but the many other different trails as well. Different trails, different journeys, which are basically challenges because they do vary by difficulty, and they'll tell you that. Because, green, orange, red, colors of difficulty. Easy, medium, hard. And so.
Yes,
and each time when you complete those journeys, you do unlock items for you to buy off the store and occupations that you should do any long-term trails, especially the main Oregon Trail. Then the random people you pick off the beginning, now it can have a little bit more variety of occupations that you could pick out. But it's still random. It's just more choices now. Just to increase the chance that, like a cook or a carpenter or what other occupations out there to appear more because you unlocked them now. So yeah, that's just a lot of maintenance for not only yourselves and your wagon and to the lesser extent your oxen.
So is this make the game more fun?
For any Oregon Trail aficionado, even the most oldest of old school, like probably 60-year-olds would probably come appreciate how much that they would, add it and try to make it more challenging, especially as they try the more challenging trails.
Well, that's right up your alley in terms of like the it is the micromanaging. I use this word every time you're on the show. It's like the degree to which you have to care about stuff that isn't to you. It's like if you're playing an RPG, right? You're playing as Henry in is that his name? Henry in Kingdom Come.
Mm-hmm.
So you're playing as that guy, right? You only really have to worry about yourself, and that's manageable. It's bullshit what they make you do, but it's manageable.
Yeah.
This, it's like, oh no, you have to worry about everyone in your party and their health and their safety and how much they eat and how much they weigh. Because if they got too many fat asses on this trail, we're gonna have to leave them behind.
No, you have to be a fat ass to keep yourself healthy because if you had, set to bare bones ration, then that makes health or stamina deteriorate a little bit more each passing day.
Sorry, no food today. I was all full up on bullets in this tiny box.
Oh shit!
Eat the gunpowder.
Oh shit! I remember because one of the other long trails besides the Oregon Trail, there's also the California Trail, which was the last time I did a video on it. The last trail I've done was the California one. It's the whole Gold Rush thing, and there is an item that you can buy only exclusive to that trail, which is one of those little nitrogen, explosives.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you're not careful, because like during the trail, and this is also an item that you should buy that you must be encouraged to get if you're the kind of person that is like you just don't want to fix because stuff keeps breaking down, and sometimes your wagon does take damage, in the sense of not necessarily a part breaking, but you would just hear a little, but not enough of the to say a wheel broke, but it's just there's a hole, and you've got to plug that hole, especially if you're going to cross the river, because if you did not fix your wagon, if you didn't have your toolboxes, which is an item that you have to fix with, or even spare part, which is another thing that you can use to plug those said holes in the little squares that we mentioned before, because since they do take up slots, because like if there is damage, you would see a glowing orange, which is basically it's like, hey, there's a part that's damaged, so be careful if you put an item there, because if it turns red, like your wagon takes damage, and if that square turns red, the item gets thrown out, and you would have to stop to make a choice of you either want to throw that item out or place it somewhere else in the grid away from the red until you fix it, if you got the toolboxes available. Do you get what I'm saying?
I understand it. I'm just sighing because every single thing sounds just like another giant pain in the ass. Why would you want to play this?
And to go back to the explosives thing, I try to keep that away from the spots that may be susceptible to breakage, because if you drop that little explosive, that'll take even more damage to your wagon if it happens to be in a square of where your little explosive thing was.
Why don't you just fucking buy the explosives in California? Why do you have to drag them all the way with you?
Because there's a little destination you go to, which is one of those gold mines, which you can either have a choice of hey, pick which party member a high stamina to mine the gold. Or alternative is, hey, plant the explosives and blow up the whole damn mine, and then yeehaw, we got gold nuggets.
And all it took was all of our food and driving slowly.
Yes, and
luckily we can eat this gold, right?
yes, gold takes up space, and you can use that said gold in the California Trail to either trade with it or give it to the assayer so you could get even more money out of it.
I'm having horrible flashbacks to the Yukon Trail, the only one of these dumbass games I ever played.
Yeah, the Klondike Gold Rush.
Yeah, but it's the same fucking thing. It's like, cool, we made it all the way here. What now? We're with no money and no food. We got a lot of gold, though. Gold brick, gold dirt. Guess we eat it. Guess we snort gold because we can't afford shit.
And speaking of eating, yeah, there's one more trail, which I have not recorded video of, but whenever I go back to playing that game, there is one trail I've not done yet. And that is the Chisholm Trail, which I doubt you heard of it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, because we're both from Texas, and we should be familiar with that part of the trail, because it starts from there. Because, yeah, you start off from San Antonio, Texas, and you go all the way up to Abilene, Kansas. Yeah. So,
Are you driving cattle? Because there's no other reason to go
yes,
there.
it's a cattle drive in addition to your wagon. Yeah.
I was joking, but it actually is.
Yes, it's a cattle drive along with, a few other people who are that you sometimes count along the way that are driving their cattle. You gotta, mingle with them. And then at the same time, each time you go to a campsite, and it also seems encouraged, and that is to do a bit of cooking in the sense of, hey, these ingredients that you picked up on the trail, try to mix them up and see what kind of meal you're making and see if...
Level up your alchemy skill, sure.
Yeah, that's what it is, basically. It's like, okay, what's the combination that you put into that stew of yours to see how the, Texas cattle drivers like it. And then eventually when we get to the end, then we'll unlock the cook class. And those ingredients that you mentioned will be available for the main Oregon Trail whenever you decide to replay it. Everything that you unlocked from the past journeys will be applied to there.
So it's that old commercial for paste picante sauce?
Yeah.
You have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm just going with it.
And now we go from old Bohemia to 1800s Oregon to fucking space.
Yeah, that's like sudden for you.
At least, space is more interesting than Oregon or Bohemia. Sorry, people who live higher. Now, when you first brought this idea to me, this is really what the main event of the show, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And you were trying to describe it to me. I was like, so all you do is flip switches in this game. And then you sent me some screenshots here to give me a better context of what you're doing. And yeah, it appears all you're doing is flipping switches. What's the name of this game, to be clear?
It is called Reentry in Orbital Simulator. That's what the full name of the game is.
So, how would you describe the kind of game this is?
It's a space flight simulator. It's a physics-based flight simulator where you learn how to operate and fly spacecrafts that were used in real life. This is dated from the 1960s, space race era,
I was going to say, so there's no shuttles, it's all rockets.
Yeah, this was the rocket era. And the capsules, as the term was then called at that time.
Well, that's what they are. They're tiny, triangular... what's a 3D shape when it's not a triangle? Not pyramid. The cone, whatever. They're little cones out there that you shove 2 or 3 people into. And, if you've seen Apollo 13, that's basically it. It's like, okay, send your little Kerbals up into space and, alright, come back down now. Is that the whole thing?
Yeah, basically. But again, for now, this is still in active development. It's been in early access since 2015, I believe. That's how long it's been around.
The thing I understand most from about Steam games is that early access doesn't mean anything anymore. People never come out of early access. That's just the term that they use now. I've got a game on my wishlist that's been in early access for 3 years. It's never actually going to be full released.
Mm-hmm. And I got Reentry off of a Steam winter sale. But this is actually due to this is in part of my long fascination regarding, space exploration, the history of the space race, which had a revival over the last year. at least for me, with regarding the interest of it. But I could go as far back as in my childhood. Do you remember Knowledge Adventure or whatever, where they have
The dinosaur one only.
3D Dinosaur Adventure, Speed, Undersea Adventure. They all.
I never bothered with any of them that were not the dinosaur ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's all again, it's all educational stuff. But they do have one for space, which obviously based off how this was dated. This was dated back in 1992, and so some of that information is slightly outdated, and obviously years have passed. Technology marches on of what we do now, and what everybody in the world does now regarding space exploration and such. Like I remember in Space Adventure, they say like, when do we go back to the moon? And then the approximate date that they claimed back then, 2012.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, as of this recording, that on the date that we're on, by the way, Buzz Aldrin, the second man who went to the moon, he just turned 94 today.
Way to date the podcast, and you don't know when I'm going to let this thing out.
Yeah, that's why I said recent. But anyways, in the Reentry and Orbital Simulator, there's only three, well, probably four, which is part of Apollo, spacecrafts that you can fly, so to speak, because you're just simply, they send you up the orbit, and you orbit around the world. Except for Apollo, if you intend to go to the moon and land on the moon. So the available spacecrafts that they have is the ones from Project Mercury, Project Gemini, and Project Apollo. And you probably heard me say that word Gemini because blame NASA.
I was about to correct you.
Yeah, because blame NASA because that's what they and the astronauts kept pronouncing it at that time, and they just kind of stuck with it. And we mentioned before, it's physics-based flight simulator, so basically it is very, very realistic of what it must have been like at that time.
Flipping switches in a tiny area.
Yeah, and you go through the checklist. I mean, I could have sent you more screenshots, which I would have sent you a screenshot of the checklist, but it would be like, whoa, that's way too much information for you.
Wow, it's like a checklist or something.
Yes.
So this also goes back to the Kingdom Come Deliverance idea of ultra realism, except this one's actually even more realistic than that game, because that game is filled with bullshit that they hide under realism. Reentry seems to be like, what if actual? Like, what if you were just in a tiny room flipping switches?
After launch, of course, and after the separation from the rocket and the capsule.
Well, do you have to do all that shit, or does the computer do it for you?
The launch is automated, and you can delay the countdown if you wish. And you can tell whenever you're ready to launch or whatever. I mean, that's at your discretion. But for an average mission, they give you the T minus. Time usually starts from 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Unless you want to say ready to launch, it just get it over with. Unless you want to hold countdown for whatever reason. Like that one time that Howland, I mean, I'm just going to use real life, references of past space flights as a reference. Like, like everybody knows the first man in space was Yuri Gagarin, right?
Allegedly.
And the second man and first American was Alan Shepard. And you probably know that, like, I don't know if you know this, but did you know that the main protagonist of Mass Effect was named after him?
I'm very aware of that, yes. There's lots of references to real-life astronauts throughout Mass Effect lore.
Mm-hmm. And there was this thing that, prior to, I mean, it was a suborbital flight where it's not orbital, but you're just up there for like a few minutes before you just come down, which is there in the game. Because, one of the first things I did by the way, the tutorial are also known as academies, where, like, if you want to learn how to fly that particular spacecraft, you gotta go through the academy to go through all these steps for each of these things to get familiar with everything of how it works in that spacecraft before you move on to the next one if you wish to.
The broadest comparison I can make is the Apollo 13 movie, because it's the most popular thing that people will have seen, right?
What was that?
So that's my frame of the Apollo 13 movie, because that's my frame of reference for what people have seen, right? So I'm just throwing this out there. So in the parts where they're in the actual spacecraft and they're in front of the huge board and they've got all the switches and all the knobs and all the diddly bops, that glow and light up and mean different things, and the part where they're running through the checklist of all that shit, that's the game.
Yes, just to make sure everything is a-okay, as they say in transmissions. At least back in the Mercury days, because they kind of use that excessively. Because back then, I mean, and also I just want to make mention of this one YouTube channel that I watch on occasions. That's Lunar Module 5, where it's a channel that's for space fans who have an interest of historical footage and emissions from the space program, including syncing in, like especially if you were to watch the videos of the Mercury missions, where they would sync not only the footage of the rocket being launched, and as well as the astronaut inside, sync it correctly, as well as the audio to get it exact. Even though, even though the early spaceflight was just nothing but running commentary, to make sure everything works. Because back then, as someone would describe it in one of the comments I saw for one of the Gemini missions, that says that everybody in Mercury were basically test pilots, but it was Gemini that turned test pilots into astronauts, like a transitionary.
Okay.
Yeah, because when I was watching footage of the Gemini missions, that there was much less chatter, unless they talk some really important stuff, instead of constant, how you doing, transition back and forth like they did in Mercury. Because
as in like they were more confident with how systems were running, so they need to constantly be like, "Is this thing broken? Is this broken? Are you dead?"
Yeah, because it's something that's never been done before. Because nobody attempted it.
I fail to see how that can make for an interesting video game.
Yeah.
Look, I get the historical degree of importance is not something to be argued here, but like based on just the screenshots and your description off air, it's like, okay, you're an astronaut, but you don't do any space stuff. You're entirely in the rocket or in the capsule, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I only had the experience with the Mercury and Gemini spacecraft, where you're just basically inside it and haven't really done, what is, that would come later, such as, the spacewalk and the docking, which I have not done this one Gemini mission yet, where you have to dock with the Agena target vehicle. Which, have you ever seen the movie First Man?
No, no, it looked like trash.
Well, there's a scene. It's a mission called Gemini 8, where Neil Armstrong and I forget who was the other one that was in with him. I mean, it's a two-person thing. I mean, I showed you images of the Gemini spacecraft as well.
Yes.
Where it's the first time that they attempted to dock. The docking was done, right? And so, and in that particular mission in Gemini 8, there was a thing that kind of malfunctioned a bit, and since you know what that spacecraft looked like, so that way you can have the image of that in your head. So just
It's a cone.
yes, like suddenly there was a little malfunction that caused it to go into a violent roll, like it kept spinning to the left, and they thought, oh, it must be the target vehicle, and then okay, jettison that, and then it started spinning faster and faster, so it's like it would make you very, very, very dizzy. But somehow in real life, Neil Armstrong kept his cool and just try to kill the roll, slow this thing down. Some said, at least, I mean, compared to movie and TV depictions of that mission, not only in First Man, but as well as the episode 1 of From the Earth to the Moon, the HBO miniseries, which that was depicted there. That in real life, they said it took about 30 minutes. So, yeah, you're spinning continuously for nearly 30 minutes, but of course, the last couple minutes, you're just slowing it down bit by bit using all those boosters, which you're using it manually because they do have automatic, fuel usage versus manual fuel usage when using thrusters.
Yeah, that Earth to the Moon thing. Did we see that together, or was that a different thing? I know we saw something.
From the Earth to the Moon, we saw that some episodes together.
Yeah,
because that was
I'm trying to remember
remastered.
Yeah, I was gonna say because they redid it, right? There was an original one from like the early 2000s.
It came out in 1998.
That long ago? Oh shit. Yeah, but then they redid it again with some other shit. Yeah, yeah. Okay. The original silent movie was just some bullshit from H.G. Wells. But anyway, so do you actually do that mission in the game?
There are some scenarios. I mean, there is a campaign, so to speak. I mean, it goes. There's kinds of. There's the academy for you to learn the step by step of each spacecraft. Then there's the missions, or basically scenarios, and then there's the campaign of it. But so far, again, only done the aforementioned Mercury and Gemini. Haven't done Apollo yet. Haven't, gotten into the Academy tutorial with that thing, which is probably even more complex than the other two, based on what you see on the inside.
I don't see how something can be more complex than just a bunch of switches and knobs and lights.
Uh, and also, there is realism options in the settings in the game, um, which for now, the default is a 1% chance of some instrument or whatever part has a chance of failure or malfunction, but it hasn't happened to me yet, even though I've only been 10 hours at space. Not in one mission, but this is total elapsed time, career statistic.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've been up in space for about 10 hours, which may sound like a long time, but then again, there were missions in the past where they spend days up there, sometimes a week when you go to the moon and stuff.
Yeah, but you're not.
I'm not what, real life?
You're not going to spend 10 hours playing this game in a row.
There is an achievement in the game, Steam achievements, you know how they are. There is an achievement in the game where you have to do this Apollo mission where you go from launch, then you go over the moon, then you can fly this lunar lander thing, which yes, you can fly it in the game as well. I have no training with that as of yet. You can land on the moon there, and then you got to come back up there to dock, and then return to the Earth, and then splash down. You have to do it in a single session without saving. That's an achievement.
Okay.
But there is such thing as time sticker in the game, just to make the game go faster. But don't do it too fast, otherwise, as the tip says, in loading screens, that if it says don't always leave it too high, otherwise you'll get inaccurate readings. Because you just went by so fast, or we went past through what we were supposed to do.
Okay.
So yeah,
You don't have to do any math here, do you?
a little bit. I mean, in the Mercury missions, there's not much math. It's just you and the capsule, and if you want to fly manually, that's your choice. But it's from then onwards is when you would have to fly manually. There's no autopilot. The autopilot was only on the Mercury thing, because that was just test pilot stuff, and and there were no computers on that thing. Gemini and Apollo, they have computers, even though the computer was kind of early in its day, in the mid '60s. Became a little more sophisticated for Apollo, for not just the capsule, but also the lunar lander module. We had to get accurate readings, and again, it's more checklist stuff, and you got to have a little math for that. But then again, you're talking to a person who never went to college or had a degree of engineering, which is a way to qualify to be an astronaut in real life.
I imagine actually NASA has really lowered their standards of qualification over the last few years. And a lot of companies seem to have been doing that last few years.
So is it much easier to become an astronaut today than it was in the 60s?
I think, based on what Elon Musk is doing, it's easier to go to space if you're not associated with the government. The government seems to be the big hurdle in terms of getting back to space for the United States at the very least. Other countries are sending up shit all the time.
Yeah, that's what the term civilian astronaut is for.
Yeah, that movie with what's his name? Billy Bob Thornton.
Space Cowboys?
No, that was Astronaut Farmer. Or the Farmer Astronaut? Look, I never saw it either. So I like sci-fi, the science, the fiction part of science.
Yeah, but real life?
Ugh. Look, Apollo 13 is a good movie.
Yeah.
That's kind of where it ends for me. I don't, those docudramas from the Earth to the Moon stuff, that was interesting because those people were interesting. The space flight pre-checks were not interesting. What Gene Collin got up to on the moon was not interesting. It's just the man himself is more interesting because he was the last man on the moon.
Yeah, there was another space movie that I forgot to mention, which is what really kickstarted that interest. That eventually led me to that game as part of the whole interest of that topic.
Sure.
And that's the Right Stuff from 1983, which had an ensemble.
Which is mostly fiction, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's based off of a novel.
Yeah, so it's not even true to life, even if it uses some real life people.
Yeah, and not to mention that film was made while except one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts were still around at that time.
I assume nobody played themselves.
Oh, one who is not an astronaut that did sort of had a role, but it's not himself as character, but he's just in the background. Chuck Yeager as some bartender in one of the scenes. And there was a little scene where one of the guys was talking about, this one of the main characters who's playing as Chuck Yeager. And it says, it's like, he didn't go to college. We can't bring him in. He's not going to be an astronaut. While behind him is the real Chuck Yeager, who's kind of listening into the conversation, except he kind of had a look on his face that makes him look like, what did you just say? So yeah, I mentioned before, that Right Stuff movie isn't just about the Mercury astronauts, but a part of it, at least from a first, like 20% of the movie is all about Chuck Yeager, breaking the sound barrier and pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting people and stories about the early days, pre-Mercury even. And they're like, well, let's just go to the sky and go really fast. And it's like, okay, what if we go past the sky? And then Kennedy's all New Deal. No, not the New Deal. The New Frontier speech. It's like, because it's easy, because it's hard. And, that gets repeated forever. I'm sure that's in the fucking movie.
Actually, no, it didn't. Because it happened during while Mercury was ongoing rather than before it. Okay. And in that particular film, they only covered, I would say, 3-4 individuals mainly of the Mercury astronauts, with Shepard, Grissom, Glenn, and Cooper. But for the other ones that I have not mentioned, hard to get any role. Especially Dick Sladen, who is basically a hero in another story, which is in other space movies like Apollo 13 and New York to the Moon, where he's more prominent.
But the thing people remember about The Right Stuff is that cover, right? It's like 8 astronauts lining up walking down the thing. Basically what's been recreated with Cowboys and the Avengers and shit like that. Just a bunch of people in a line walking towards
that was the first movie to do that.
Which is stupid, because you're not going to fit 8 astronauts in anything.
Yeah, it's just basically
where are y'all walking to?
Yeah, it's just for show. Even this one person, which is one of those movie reactor type of person that I subscribe to and watch. I won't mention her name. It's what she says. They don't need the helmets on. It's okay. Leave them on. Go get them, boys. That's what she was like during that whole shot.
Yeah, I'm familiar with like the trappings of that movie. I've never actually seen it in that. Yeah, I've seen Rocket Man starring Harlan Williams. That counts, right?
Oh yeah, I watched that a long time ago.
Well, it's a guy training to go to Mars. It's basically the same thing.
And as well as that one movie, it's one of those Mars movies. There were about 2 of them that came out that same year. Which I can only remember the one with Gary Sinise, who was also in Apollo 13.
Not John Carpenter's Ghost to Mars. What the fuck is that other movie called?
Mission to Mars?
Yeah, but there's another one. Is he's the one in Mission to Mars? I've seen one of the two, where they discover like an ancient civilization. See, that's the thing. That's science fiction.
Yeah, that's the one that's more your speed.
Fiction. Yeah, I've definitely seen the Gary Sinise one. I just can't remember the title. So to drag this all the way back to the video game Reentry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, back to Reentry. That wording there.
I think he's attempting Reentry, sir. It says at the end of Moonraker. I gotta ask, Thomas, is this game fun?
If you know what the hell you're doing, and if you're, I think I would say yeah, but especially if it gets more challenging, if something breaks down. Especially, I was given this one, like this part of the tutorial for the Mercury spacecraft, which I've been wondering. It's like in real life, all the Mercury missions were successful, except for the one with Gus Grissom after splashdown, because that little hatch that just blew and sunk the capsule, and we didn't retrieve it again until 1999. And that's one of the things of like it's like, yes, all the missions were successful, but it's like, such as inside of the atmosphere in the capsule is all pure oxygen. Like, whatever happens if something get caught on fire? And there is this little thing in the tutorial which they did tell me, it's like, in the event of a fire, you gotta decompress the oxygen, basically get that oxygen out of there in order to extinguish the fire inside the cockpit. Instead, like if something goes wrong in there, especially, you got to be careful with the voltage, like the amount of switches that you flip. Be careful of how much voltage you're using. That if something goes off, then it goes off. and then you gotta
Sure.
take emergency steps for that. But however, in my 10 hours of space, the amount of time spent there, I only had one screw up that I can tell you a little story about that.
Mm-hmm.
It happened in a Mercury mission. It was flying this Mercury spacecraft. It's one of those things it's one of those cases where I might have missed something or I did something that I kind of screwed up because I flipped this one switch and I did not flip it back to the way it's supposed to. I was just simply following the checklist. It's like the pre-launch checklist and then the ascent checklist I went through. I mean, everything went perfectly normal, but I think during the pre-launch sequence, I might have accidentally flipped this one switch in the cockpit, which I was hoping is like, oh, I hope it didn't do anything. And it's like, oh, flipped it, just put it back into place. And again, it makes sure nobody's watching. I mean, of course nobody's watching because, in real life, the only camera that Mission Control can see is just you, the astronaut, in that cockpit, and nothing else. They don't see whatever you have in that you're flipping those instruments with.
It seems like they should probably know that. I'll say you have not made any videos on this.
I kind of would like to, but I think I would have to do it on the laptop. I mean, I've been playing on the desktop, so obviously it runs a little more better on the laptop. And it runs good here, but on my Alienware laptop, it should run way more smoothly. So I kind of want to record videos of, but that's only if anybody's willing to stomach the idea of maybe being up
Watching someone flip switches.
and whatever the hell I have to say to pass the time, and
Bring a book.
or listening to the podcast. Which, in actuality, when I listened to your previous podcast, I was actually playing that game, so I left it on normal speed. And while I'm up in orbit, I was listening to the podcast series. And every once in a while, I have to look at the instruments to make sure everything is A-okay in there. Anyways, back to the Mercury thing. So after we launch, and then, I mean, it's one of those scenario missions. It's like, okay, we need you to do at least one orbit and then come down. Okay, it's simple stuff. I mean, everything that happened up in space, everything was fine up there. Nothing significant occurred. And then they tell me it's like to do this step, and that's the fly-by-wire, which is manual, basically. So I had to do the reentry by fly-by-wire rather than let it do it automatically, autopilot. It's like, yeah, you know what, let me try this. So it will do reentry, everything would smooth, and then and the splashdown works, right? The sequence of the steps it takes, right?
I can guess, sure.
So they're in splashdown, like, okay, after you get through the whole atmosphere thing and you're coming down pretty fast, and, you're just basically, big thing that's about to come down, and then there's a step where it says, okay, once you reach about 30,000 feet, activate the drogue. You know what a drogue is, right?
Fucking course not.
A drogue is a little parachute that's supposed to slow down your descent a little before you bring out your primary parachute for you to come down gently.
Okay.
And sometimes you do have a reserve parachute in case the primary one fails. And then you deploy the landing bag, which is below the heat shield, so that way the spacecraft can float on the surface.
Okay.
So this is the part where I screwed up, because that's only I found out after the fact. So by the time we reach 30,000 feet, then the light comes up. It's like, okay, hit the drogue, which it's supposed to be set to automatic. And I was having confidence because I knew I must have did something. So 30,000 feet, okay, drogue light is on, activated. Like, it's like, okay, auto, and then it's still going down fast. It's like, okay, it didn't go auto. Okay, let me pull the switch to drogue, and that's when I just panicked a little. Which, in real life, you're not supposed to panic as an astronaut because, they all have balls of steel. You got to be calm-mannered. But here, in this one, it's like, okay, the drogue did not go off. Pull it manually, and I'm like, oh, shit, what the hell? And then eventually it did. And I prematurely also, it's like, yes, the drogue got activated, but I prematurely, just out of panic, to activate the primary parachute, but no parachute came out. And then, like, okay, shit, maybe I'm going to do a reserve. Then I looked to the left, and I noticed one thing, and this has happened right after I splashed. I didn't, just sink down on the surface. I mean, I did splash down, but the game says successful splashdown. And this is something I would have sent you screenshots of, which would have made you laugh. Which there were only 2 of them. So, you just picture the Mercury spacecraft. I mean,
A big cone in the water.
yes, it's floating with the thing pointed upwards. It's upside down. It's floating upside down.
Probably shouldn't
So
be.
the only thing that's sticking out of the water is the heat shield and the landing bag. So yeah, I'm upside down, and everything in the cockpit looks fine. I was just sitting there after I heard the transmission, it says splashdown successful, and I'm like, "Are you sure?" Because it looks kind of dark, underwater and everything. And when I look to the left, there's this one little switch that it flipped, which is actually what prevents the automatic system for the drogue and the parachute from going off. I had it turned off as part of a pre-launch or ascent checklist. I forgot to flip it back into place during the descent phase as I was going through that checklist.
That's what I was going to ask you. So, the only way you can fuck up in this game is if manual error.
Yeah.
They don't auto give you mechanical failure.
Which is a 1% chance of that happening, which can be adjusted in settings.
Okay, so so my question is does it give you random events basically? Is what I'm asking, or you have to fuck everything up in order to fuck up?
A little bit of both, and and speaking of the word, the F-bomb here. Do you? I mean, since we mentioned that astronaut Alan Shepard earlier, have you ever heard of Shepard's prayer?
Shepherd's pie.
Yeah, which prior to his spaceflight, which is the first American one, American one they did, after they closed the door on the thing, closed the hatch. The first thing that he said, and it was apparently hot mic'd, that term, in which he says, "Dear Lord, please don't let me fuck up." And apparently I did on that one.
Well, he didn't die, so I guess that's fine.
Yeah, I didn't on that one. Oh, yeah, I forgot. That was another thing, just one little tiny thing. Part of the, splashdown procedure. But before the drogue, you also activate the snorkel because, the oxygen was used while you're up in space. I mean, not all the way, but some usage of it, with not just the craft, but also your suit and everything. Yes, there is such thing as a spacecraft temperature and a suit temperature, which you got to pay attention to both.
Sure.
And sometimes oxygen's a bit used, and then when you're going down, they tell you to activate the snorkel, which is basically, okay, now you're getting some air back in. So does that mean, since I've splashed down, upside down, that I am sucking in water rather than air? Which I did see the oxygen meter going down a little bit faster than it normally would after the successful splashdown. But it still counts as a mission complete, which each time you complete the mission, they can tell you it's you can exit out the game at any time at your discretion.
I would assume so, yes. Although based on the way the thing is designed, I don't even know how, because it's bottom heavy. How the fuck would you even land upside down? Even if you had no parachutes, it would still land bottom down. That's how gravity works.
In the outside view, it's actually tilted a little. It's not a. I mean, I'm trying to use the compass degree angles, from 0 to 180 degree. I think it was at slight 90-degree angle, a little bit crooked. That's the way it was coming down before me. I get to set off the drogue and then the main chute and the reserve chutes to make sure everything. But anyway, they still came out successfully. It's just, it was still manual error because I apparently turned off the auto switch that was supposed to go off on its own when it reaches a certain altitude. But since that time, I had no screw-ups since then. So I haven't had any errors on any of the Gemini missions that I've flown since I was still doing a academy exam. And haven't done the docking scenario, so who knows how long that would go. And then the eventual, when I do the whole academy, and then later the actual missions for the Apollo missions, which would probably be even more complex, especially when you get to the moon, and then they tell you to, now you go use that lander module thing to land on the moon. Which is miraculous when you think about it in real life that they were all successful, but how can a person like me can screw this up since everybody did it back then?
Well, they were smarter and they did more math. You really just, you can hit pause whenever you fucking want. It's a video game. And
also changing the time scale to go faster at your own discretion.
Yeah, obviously. Otherwise, you'd be there a fucking month playing this one game. Well, alone 10 hours. 10 weeks. Is that all you had?
Yeah, pretty much.
So again, I'm not something I would ever play. As far as like
I mean, you probably played
needlessly tedious.
Yeah, you've probably played a few, not necessarily space flight simulator games, but involving space flight that isn't
Dude,
a simulator.
Okay, no. When I'm playing fucking Starfield and I have to flip switches on my damn ship, it's just like, oh, time to warp to the next system. Oh, I didn't flip the switch. Hold on. Take off shield, put up 2 thing. I don't like doing that, and that's a 10-second annoyance. I don't like doing that shit. I am more inclined to try like a strategy game. Playing a lot of the Warhammer stuff recently. I'm more inclined to try a strategy game than I am like a simulator game. Simulator games just irk me because it's all micromanagement. We run the gamut here, right?
Uh-huh.
In Kingdom Come, you just have to worry about yourself and your own food and your health. In Oregon Trail, the newest version, you have to worry about all your damn party members. And then Reentry, you're like, okay, flip all these switches, then I'll flip off all the switches. Like, fuck me, that's so much micromanagement.
Yeah, just follow the damn checklist. It's not given to you automatically. It's still manual. It's just you hit M and on mission view, and then there's a little section like, okay, go to the tab, checklist. Okay, pick which checklist to be exact. Like check instruments, pre-launch, launch, ascent, orbit, and all that.
Good reading on top of all the math. So yeah, as I said earlier, you play a lot of more esoteric games than I would even dare to. Or Eagles Dare, or whatever the fuck they say. What was it? Where Eagles Dare about? It was a plane movie, right?
Yeah, that's a plane movie, but I think it's in World War II, I think.
Yeah, whatever. I have dared to venture far enough into this episode. I wanted to make it purposefully shorter as opposed to the previous 3-hour end-of-year monstrosity that we had. Again, we were supposed to do this back in like mid-December, but it keeps getting delayed. Let's see how long it takes me to release this one with all the editing.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people find you on the internet?
On the Lord Masta YouTube channel, which...
Please remind people of the spelling.
Oh, and one little thing before I spell it out here. There is a text-to-speech in the Reentry game, which still has that little AI voice generator thing. When I typed my name, Lord Masta, exactly, the text-to-speech says L0RD Masta. And I'm like, damn it. So I had to change my username to spell it exactly how it should be spelled instead of the 0. And then it says Lord Masta correctly.
It's your fault for putting the 0 in the first place.
Yeah. So anyways, you can find me at the Lord Masta channel. That's L0RD Masta. And Masta is MASTA. No space in between.
You gonna put up videos of Oregon Trail or Reentry soon?
Well, at this moment, I've been recently started posting videos, even though they too were delayed in a way, which is that ongoing Crusader Kings 3 series of another part of the world, which is an ongoing matter. But I will eventually return to the Oregon Trail to do a few more trails that I have not done yet, before I go back to do the whole main Oregon Trail again with all the things that I have unlocked. Just
Sure.
to have that more enhanced experience than it was the first time. But videos on Reentry, well, once I get a hang of all 3D spacecraft, and depending on the scenarios that I'm doing, especially for a campaign, I'm sure I might record videos that might be worth one's time. And sometimes wish there was multiplayer. I mean, there is multiplayer in the game, but it's still beta of some sorts, which I can imagine. I mean, I doubt you wouldn't do it, but what I mean
Hell
is,
no.
like we mentioned a Gemini spacecraft, and it's two of them. Like there's me on this one seat, and then there's you on the other few policemen, which I pay attention and all that.
What is my incentive to not kill us? No, I'm not playing this. You can find me on Twitter or X if you're a weirdo at Loki Jarson. This podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye. Press stop.